this is lesson 2 from George's Secret Key to the Universe. And our words for this lesson are offended on page 37, enlightenment on page 40, inquiry on page 41, and fusion on page 50. Okay, so on page 37, here right in the middle, we have, I'm going to start up here. "You have forgotten something," said a strange mechanical voice. George jumped out of his skin. "Have I?" Eric looked confused for a moment. "Yes," said the voice. "You have not introduced me." "I'm so sorry," exclaimed Eric. "George, this is Cosmos, my computer." George gulped. He had no idea what to say. "You have to say hello to Cosmos," said Eric in a side whisper to George. "Otherwise, he'll get offended." "Hello, Cosmos," said George nervously. He'd never spoken to a computer before, and he didn't quite know where to look. All right, so our word is offended, and we're going back to the conversation about George being introduced to the computer, and Eric says to him to the side, sort of in a whisper, "You have to say hello to Cosmos, otherwise he'll get offended." So if he doesn't do something, if he doesn't say hello, then the computer's going to get offended. So the computer won't be happy, something along those lines. So hopefully that will help you figure out how to write your sentence for the word offended. The next word is enlightenment, and that is on page 40. Okay, so we find enlightenment down here towards the bottom, and George is reading an oath out loud, and it says, "I swear to use my scientific knowledge for the good of humanity. I promise never to harm any person in my search for enlightenment." And then we see the living room door open, and then Annie comes in and she's got a bag of potato chips. So I'm gonna say there is not much in here that's going to help me figure out what the word means. I might be able to use parts of the word to try to figure it out, and if I can't really get a good grasp of it, then I'm going to go look it up in the dictionary and make sure before I write my sentence. Okay, so then the next word is inquiry on page 41, and that's right here in the center. And Eric says, "Well done, George. You are now the second youngest member of the Order of Scientific Inquiry for the Good of Humanity." "I salute you," said Cosmos. All right, so here's your word inquiry. Now you might be able to figure out from this, if you know the word inquire, then you might be able to figure out a meaning for this word. Otherwise, I would go look it up in the dictionary and make sure. And then the last one is on page 50, and the word is fusion. And so we see that a lot in this paragraph here. "Nothing is forever, George," said Eric. "If stars shone forever, we wouldn't be here. Inside their bellies, stars transform small particles into larger ones. That is what a nuclear fusion reaction does. It fuses small particles together and builds big atoms out of small ones. The energy released by this fusion is enormous, and that's what makes the stars shine." Okay, so going back, we have talk about what a nuclear fusion reaction does, and it says up here, inside their bellies, stars transform small particles into larger ones. And then it says it fuses small particles together. It fuses small particles together and builds big atoms out of small ones. So we can sort of get an idea from that. We're bringing small particles together to make bigger particles. Okay, and then now we're going to move on to our writing prompt. and we are going to write an explanatory paragraph about how the narrator's point of view affects the reader's interpretation of events. So I'm just going to go back to page 37 and just look at the passage that I read before. So back where they're talking to the computer, it says, "You have forgotten something," said a strange mechanical voice. George jumped out of his skin. So right here, the narrator is telling us about George and an action that he's seeing George do. George jumped out of his skin. "Have I?" Eric looked confused for a moment. "Yes," said the voice. "You have not introduced me." "I'm so sorry," exclaimed Eric. "George, this is Cosmos, my computer." George gulped. He had no idea what to say. All right, so we have right here, George jumped out of his skin, and right here, George gulped. He had no idea what to say, and the narrator is telling us both of these things, his observations about George. So then if we look at the prompt, and you don't have to use that passage, you can use any passage that is describing the character's thoughts or feelings or actions. You're going to write an explanatory paragraph. So you're going to explain how the narrator's point of view affects the reader's interpretation of events. If the narrator hadn't given us that information about George gulping or George being anxious, then we wouldn't maybe have that feeling about George. So the narrator's point of view is influencing us. It's giving us information. It's sort of making us think a certain way about George. So if you find, you can use that example, or you can go through and find any other example, but you need to use text evidence to support your answer. Okay, and here are the questions for lesson 2. So these are from pages 40, 41, and 42 from the book, and so you need to go back and reread them and reference them when you're answering the questions, because it says using evidence from the text. So you're going to need to talk specifically about what it says in the text. How does George feel about taking the oath? And which details from the narrator's description of George help develop this idea? So both of these questions, you need to come back right here to the top of page 40, and where he's taking the oath is all the way through 40 and halfway through 41. And so already I can see George stood up straighter and looked Eric in the eye. "I am," he confirmed. So already right there, there's some evidence about how George feels about taking the oath. And then the next two questions, how does George feel when trying to figure out which key to press on Cosmos's keyboard, and which details from the narrator's description of George help develop this idea? So right here at the bottom of page 41, it says, "George, you may now use the secret key that unlocks the universe." "Can I?" asked George. "Where is it?" "Go over to Cosmos," said Eric quietly, "and look at his keyboard. Can you guess which one you need to press? Can you figure out which one is the secret key that will unlock the universe for you?" "Annie, say nothing." George did as he was told. Cosmos might be the world's most powerful computer, but his keyboard was just an ordinary, familiar one, with the letters and symbols laid out in the same order as even the school's crummiest computer. George thought hard. Which key would be the one to unlock the universe for him? He looked again at the keyboard, and suddenly he knew. "It's this one, isn't it?" he said to Eric, his finger hovering. Eric nodded. "Press it, George, to begin." George's finger came down on the key marked Enter. Suddenly, the lights in the room started to fade. "Welcome," said Cosmos, playing a little computerized fanfare, "to the universe." So, right there from 41 and 42, we can get an idea about how George feels when he's trying to figure out which key to press on Cosmos's keyboard. And we can go back and get some details from the narrator's description of George and how to answer this question here.